Welcome to Political Dharma with Alan Zundell. It is Friday, November 29th, 2024, the day after the Thanksgiving holiday here in the United States. And I hope that all of you who are watching this, wherever you are, have something or someone in your life that you are thankful for. I know I do, and I've been spending a little bit more time with my family, my children and grandchildren over the last week or so. But I do have a few stories to bring you from the previous 7 days. Three stories that I want to get into a little more deeply and give you some of my commentary on, and then just catching up on a few other stories. So, the three big stories I want to bring to you today. One is that three minor parties here in California are challenging the state in a lawsuit, claiming that their top two voting system violates their constitutional rights. The second story is about Senator Bernie Sanders, the former presidential candidate in the Democratic primary in 2016 and 2020. Sanders came out this week and criticized the Democratic Party, expressed his sense that the Democratic Party is not going to change its stripes, and he was encouraging potential candidates who share his agenda to consider running as independents, at least in some circumstances. So I'll give you my views of what Sanders had to say and take that apart a little bit. And then the third story is about the Green Party's presidential candidate, Jill Stein. She was in an interview earlier this week in which she talked about how the Green Party is potentially changing into something different and building within it a wider coalition, integrating itself into a wider coalition. So we'll listen to a few excerpts from that, and then I'll have some things to say about that. And finally, I'm going to just catch you up on the situation where Democratic operatives, people affiliated with the Democratic Party, were trying to sabotage the campaigns of alternative presidential candidates, particularly the No Labels Party, when they were out to recruit a presidential candidate, and the Green Party and Robert F. Kennedy Jr. and Cornel West. They had their hands in a lot of that. So you know that if you've been watching this channel over the last year or so as I covered the alternative candidates for president, how much monkey business was going on there. Most of it at the hands of the Democrats this time around. If the Republicans were involved in something like this, it was a little more hidden, and I'm not sure whether or not that was there, but stuff going on in the Libertarian Party makes me suspicious. Anyway, so that is one thing I want to catch up on. And then finally, another thing is the Libertarian Party and Robert F. Kennedy Jr. So I'll have a short news item about that. Let's get started on the first story then, which has to do with the three minor parties that are challenging the state of California's electoral system. They brought a lawsuit into federal court. Let me pull it up here. And this is the face page of that complaint. The plaintiffs include the Peace and Freedom Party, the Libertarian Party of California, and the Green Party of California, as well as a number of people who are mostly candidates of these three parties who have run in elections here, and then a couple of voters, because they are claiming that this violates the rights not only of the people who participate in these minor parties, but the candidates and people who would like to vote for candidates of those parties as well. So this was last Thursday, that is a week previous to Thanksgiving. These three parties, plus the other people involved, filed a federal lawsuit in district court in Northern California here, challenging the constitutionality of the so-called top two voting system for federal and state offices, which are the offices, of course, where partisan labels are used. This would be the Ninth Circuit District Court of the United States. They're claiming that because their rights to free association and freedom of expression, they didn't outline exactly what rights they think are involved here, but they do list the First Amendment of the Constitution, which includes the rights of expression and association. And they also mention the 14th Amendment, which has to do with equal rights. So they're saying essentially that by interfering with the ability of these parties to get on the general election ballot, they are deprived of the opportunity to bring their message to voters and for people who want to vote for them, and candidates who carry their message to actually get a hearing in the general election. And they say this is interfering with their rights, especially freedom of expression. And then the 14th Amendment requires equal treatment under the law. And they're saying this voting system does not give equal treatment to the participants in major parties as to the participants in minor parties, that they are biased against minor parties. They say it presents an insurmountable obstacle. I think that's a quote. No, an insurmountable insurmountable barrier is the actual quote to getting on the general election ballot whenever there is more than a single candidate from a major party. So that whenever you have a Democrat and a Republican, or just two Democrats or just two Republicans in the primary, they are the ones that are going to advance to the general election ballot. Now, remember how California's system works. It has the so-called open primary, and I always append the phrase so-called because there are other types of elections that are also called open primaries that are not exactly the same. But in these, all the candidates for all the parties, that is, it can be multiple candidates from the same party, everybody that wants to run for this particular seat will be running in one big primary, and all the voters, no matter what party they affiliate with or no party, can vote on those candidates. Each voter gets to pick one candidate, and then the two candidates that get the highest number of votes advance to the general election. So the complaint here is that this just, whenever there's more than one major party candidate, those are the ones that are going to appear on the ballot, only representing the major parties in the general election ballot and shutting all the other parties out of that general election. So they say it limits their ability to attract members, to grow, and eventually to obtain offices. It makes them harder to retain their qualified political status, which enables them to get their name on the ballot for the candidates, at least in the primary. Also, uh, there's no compelling state interest which would override their constitutional limits, their constitutional rights here. And then finally, that by disallowing write-in votes, they don't even have that alternative in the end. So Judge Maxine M. Chesney was assigned this case. And then in February, there's going to be a case management scheduling for her to do the preliminaries, whether they are legally for this, I'm not even sure. So let's move on from that. You see there the complaint. There is a footnote within the text of this, and I want to point to that in particular because it references earlier court cases that had to do with the same type of open primary system, or at least something in some respects similar. So the state of Washington, earlier than California, adopted something like this, but it has significant differences too. And here the footnote is referencing Washington State Grange versus Washington State Republican Party from 2008. And then also there is a state case in California that went through the state court system, Rubin versus Padilla in 2015. So they're referencing those. And I want to bring that up because I'm going to discuss some of those cases. And then finally, in that last paragraph there, or last few sentences, they're saying that it's been more than 9 years since this voting system has been put in place. And the evidence of those years show that it does establish this insurmountable barrier because minor party candidates have not gotten on the general election ballot, which after this 2024 election actually is not true, but is still very rare. All right. So the court cases involving this type of voting system were discussed in an article on this lawsuit written by Richard Winger in Ballot Access News. And if you're watching the video, you see the title here, 3 California minor parties file federal lawsuit against top 2 system. And he discusses some of these previous cases. So let me give you some of the basics on these cases. In 2008, the U.S. Supreme Court upheld Washington State's top 2 system as constitutional. But in that one, according to Winger, the ballot access issue was not even raised. It was more of a freedom of association argument. Now, I'm not sure exactly what the argument was, but clearly people can still come together as political parties. They're free to do that. So maybe that's why it was not regarded as violated. And if they only brought up that particular issue, then that's why it wouldn't have been a problem. But Justice Scalia dissented in this case and said that it actually does violate freedom of expression, although that issue hadn't been raised. So he did render an opinion on that. The state of Washington's top two system does have one significant difference, which is that it is held much later. The primary is held much later in the election cycle. And they said that because it's held in August, that the primary election is almost like a general election as far as giving candidates from minor parties time to organize a campaign and get out in front of the public and get them to consider voting for them and get all the attention that comes from being later in the campaign season. So they said the late August primary was functioning in a lot of respects as a general election, and then the general election is sort of a runoff between the top two candidates. So they found it constitutional for reasons like that. But they also said that the hypothetically a March primary election would be way too early, which is what California actually has in presidential election years. The primary for all the offices is held in March of the presidential election year, and then in the off years when a president is not running, that is, when we're electing congressional members in the even numbered year between presidential elections, it is held in June. So I don't know if it's regarded as too early or too late, or would be regarded by a court that way, but that is a difference. So California does have it a lot earlier, so that argument may not hold as well. The Rubin versus Padilla case in 2015, the California State Court of Appeals upheld the top two system here, and it was something different. The reasoning was a bit different here. According to Winger, the problems with that decision was that the court made three errors. The first one was that it said that it is in the state interest to allow independents to vote in the primary, which is one of the main arguments used by proponents of these open primaries, that it brings independents into a state-funded election, allows them to give a vote and give their opinion on the candidates. But Winger says that in the period before this, from 2002 to 2010, when they first adopted the open primary system, that independents could vote because in congressional and state primaries, because the parties allowed them to. Now, that is the earlier definition of open primaries, in which a major party allows non-affiliated voters, that is, voters who not registered with the party, to actually vote in one of the party's primaries, and they can pick one or the other. Not sure exactly how it worked in California, but that is the idea. So Winger's argument here is that it was not true that there was a problem with allowing independents to vote in primaries previous to the system being implemented. Second error was considering the primary as a general election and the general election as a runoff, because the Supreme Court has said in another case in 1997 that it's illegal to hold a congressional election earlier than November, which is when federal law mandates that all congressional elections be held. So if they're really going to seriously consider the primary election as a general election and the primary is held before November, that would be violating a court decision in that particular case. And finally, a third reason Winger said this is a problem, said the Supreme Court has upheld that there could be a nonpartisan top two election where you have all the candidates run in the primary, but they do not have party labels attached to them. And in that particular kind of case, then in the general election, there wouldn't be party labels, so that none of the parties can say they're being shut out of the general election, because there is no party labels at all that the government is using. All right, so those are the questions. Those are the issues that Winger brought up about that. So it's unclear how this is going to be decided, and it won't be, the trial won't be taking place until sometime in early next year, I don't think. One other thing I wanted to point to here was that I mentioned that in this election that just passed in November 2024, there was a minor party candidate who made it to the general election ballot. And if you can see this, this is in California State Assembly District 9. There were 4 candidates in the primary. 2 of them were Democrats. One of them was a Republican. One of them was from the American Independent Party of California. And what happened is this is a very conservative district, and the boundaries of the district were redrawn just a couple of years ago. So it was kind of a new situation for all these candidates trying to determine their match with the electorate, but it's very conservative, so Republican leaning. And what happened is the two Democrats barely got any votes in this election. And then the Republican got 73% of the votes in the primary, but the American Independent Party candidate, who that's a fairly conservative party as well, at least it leans in that direction or is associated with this conservative philosophy, got about a quarter of the votes, 24.4%, and went to the general election along with the Republican. The Republican won, obviously, or it should be obvious, and the vote was about 70 to 30. So the American Independent Party actually picked up some of those votes from Democrats in the general election, or whoever turned out in the general election that wasn't there for the primary. So it is not true that this has never resulted in California in a candidate for a minor party making it to general election ballot, but it is true that it's very rare for that to happen, and it takes special circumstances for that to happen. So all that said, what else do I want to say about this? Now, however this case turns out, I think it was important for minor parties to bring this case up because this California system is very detrimental to minor parties, which means they can't mount a serious challenge against the major parties. Of course, you're going to think, when did they ever mount a serious challenge? But at least they can get themselves out in the public and critique the major parties' agendas in the general election in most districts. But here, it's hard for them to do that. It's also hard for them to get on the ballot because in many places, if you're a qualified party, that is, if your party has reached some threshold in state law, either of number of people registered with the party or number of votes they obtained in an election, usually a statewide election, that party then has the ability to put candidates on the ballot for all offices across that state. That's how it was in Oregon, where I lived just previous to moving to California, that let's say the Green Party could pick candidates for various offices, and all they have to do is file paperwork in order to put them on the ballot. Here in California, to get on the primary ballot for any individual office, a candidate has to gather signatures or pay a fee or some combination of the two, which means that if the Green Party wants to field a bunch of candidates for Congress, a bunch of candidates for statewide offices, a bunch of candidates for the state legislature, they're going to have to raise the money to pay those filing fees or get tons of signatures in the various districts in order to do that. So it's a very formidable barrier even getting on the primary ballot, let alone the general election ballot. So I don't think the top two system is very friendly to third parties. And those of you who have been watching me for a while know that it's one of my issues that in the United States, we're going to have a two-party system because so many offices are single candidate, which tends to lead normally toward a two-party system. But this set of two parties is so entrenched, they don't even allow competition. There have been times in the past when there were significant third-party efforts which could either force one of the major parties to go in a different direction or to adopt an issue that they hadn't before, or even to replace one of the parties. That's happened occasionally. So we do need to have a competitive system. Even though it's going to be a two-party system, it should be possible for third parties to raise challenges, and if it meets public approval with their program, to be able to grow and build pressure on the two parties and maybe even replace one, or at least get them to change their composition so that they're addressing the people that are feeling left out of the system. And the big problem today is a lot of us feel left out of the two-party system, that we don't feel represented by those parties, even though the vast majority of the public votes for Democrats and Republicans. They're not real happy about doing that, and it's usually because they hate one party more than the other, rather than that they love one of the two parties. So not a friendly system, minor parties, or the opportunity to change the electoral system in a way that makes competition more feasible. I've been reading this book lately. It's called The Primary Solution by Nick Troiano. Sorry, Nick. I don't know how to pronounce your name. And just to see, this is a book promoting this concept of open primaries. And I wanted to see what kind of arguments he was raising. If in an extended version like a book, it would be more persuasive than what I've heard people say who support these open primaries. And it wasn't to me. I'll run through quickly a couple of the problems. And I hope to do another interview with Sarah Wolk of the Equal Vote Coalition, specifically about these open primaries and what she has to say about it from their research organization. And the issue I have is I know I was previously a political scientist and my field was public policy. And I know that how you frame the question, how you frame the issue, the problem that you want to address shapes the alternatives that are going to be regarded as acceptable because they have to fit the problem as you have defined it. And I think this movement for an open primaries is not defining the problem in the way, in a way that's accurate. What they generally say is that the usual party primary system shuts out independent voters, and therefore, in order to incorporate this vast swath of the public who is now not affiliated with either of the major parties, you have to have open primaries to give them a chance to weigh in on the candidates that are going to make it to the general election ballot. Now, the whole problem with that argument is that nothing in the law prohibits these people from participating in party primaries. All they have to do is register with one of the two major parties and they can participate in that major party's primary. So there is no legal barrier to them doing that. The question really is why voters do not want to register with one of the major parties. And I think that has to do more with their sense that these parties are not representing them. And then you'd have to ask the further question, why are the parties not representing them? That is the key question, not how do we get the independents to have a voice in the primaries, but why are the two major parties not representing the interest of so many people that don't want to affiliate with major parties? And I think that has to do with a lot of things, but a big one is the electoral system itself. So we do need to reform the electoral system, but I don't think these open primaries are the way to go, even when you combine them with ranked choice voting, which has its own problems, but I don't think that helps as well. Two big problems with open primaries is number one, split vote problem, which means that if you have a lot of candidates, as we often do in these open primaries, then the voters may split among so many different candidates that none of the candidates get anywhere near a majority of the vote. You can have two candidates go to the general election ballot who most of the voters don't like, but enough voters do like that they get the most votes. The most votes could be 20% of the votes because all the other candidates got a little less than that. So you could go to the general election ballot with a fifth of the votes or even less, depending on how many candidates there are splitting the vote among them. So it's not very good at choosing the candidates that the public likes the best to get into the general election. And it also is a problem for ballot access because you have to change the whole way that minor parties and independent candidates as well are able to get on the ballot. So I don't like the open primary concept for those reasons. I do think there are things that can make it a little better. And I do think, at least I'm willing to consider that it may be better than what we mostly have in some ways. But I think there are other alternatives out there that are a lot better. So much for that. That's a long-winded topic that maybe your eyes glazed over at the details of it. But I think it is important because we do need reform of our electoral methods in order to have credible challenges to two-party system. All right, so second one here. Now, a candidate that has not been affiliated very closely with a major party, but has gotten somewhere in his career is Senator Bernie Sanders. Early in his career in Vermont, very early, decades ago, he ran as a minor party candidate a few times. And of course, he didn't get close to winning because our systems are stacked against minor parties, as I've often mentioned, and all of you probably know. And then that experience, he kind of backed up a bit, and then he decided to start running as an independent. And he won as an independent as mayor of Burlington, Vermont, and then later on ran as as a congressional candidate in for their one congressional seat, and he won that. And he went on to win as a senator from the state of Vermont. So he was an independent all this time. Now, in the U.S. Congress, he caucuses with the Democrats because his views are closer to the traditional New Deal Democratic standpoint, where you want the government to do a lot to help working people and protect unions and regulate business for the interest of consumers and working people and all of us in general. So he's more in that line with the progressive wing, the economic progressive wing of the party. But here's what he had to say in an email that went out earlier this week When was this? This was, I shuffled my notes up here a little bit because I'm an old guy and I get confused. Last week sometime, he sent out an email about his take on the election, the presidential election that was just held. Here up on your screen, you see most of what was in that email, and I've highlighted some parts. He's talking about how our economic and political systems are rigged. And then down there in the first highlighted part, the Democrats ran a campaign protecting the status quo and tinkering around the edges. So he doesn't think that the Democrats did enough to shake, to promise to shake up the system on behalf of voters. Then he talks about the Republicans and what they did right in appealing to working people. And then in another highlight part, he asks the rhetorical question, will the Democratic leadership learn the lessons of their defeat and create a party that stands with the working class and is prepared to take on the enormously powerful special interests that dominate our economy, our media, and our political life? And he answers his own question by saying, highly unlikely. So he's not too hot on the idea that the Democratic Party is going to change its stripes from supporting, say, big Wall Street investment firms and major corporations and billionaires in favor of the working class. And he says, given that reality, where do we go from here? It's a very serious question that needs a lot of discussion in the coming weeks and months. So this sets you up to think, well, where is Bernie going with this? Is he talking about some kind of other party? Is he leaving the Democratic Party since it sounds like he's given up on them, ever changes? They ask a bunch of questions having to do with how we build a multi-racial, multi-generational movement, how we create a 50-state movement, get rid of Citizens United and on. And then it ends after he asks a series of those questions. One of the final question here is, how do we build sustainable and long-term issue-based organizing structures that live beyond individual campaigns? That sounds like a party. Independent candidates generally, have particular issues they're running on, but they don't build organizational structures. We saw Robert F. Kennedy Jr. running as an independent, and he created the We the People Party, but it wasn't a serious party. It was a vehicle for him to run for president, and it may not have any life beyond that. And it looks like it won't. It only is on the ballot now in one state, Oregon, and nowhere else. So the future of that party is in doubt. Same thing with Cornel West. He created a party for his own purposes, but they probably will not have a life beyond the individual campaigns. And Bernie says, these are some of the political questions that together we need to address. Together meaning, of course, all the people on his email list. So what is he talking about here? Is he actually suggesting that he wants to form a third party with a more with an orientation towards working people, especially the non-college educated working stiffs who feel like they've been abandoned by the Democratic Party and are taking a chance on the Republican Party because of the promises of Donald Trump to make a difference in their life, which some folks are skeptical of, myself included. But the Bernie was in an interview with someone from the Nation magazine, a left-wing magazine, John Nichols. You see here the title, Bernie Sanders, we need more working class candidates to challenge both parties. Sounds pretty bold right there, but let's look down at one of the particular questions that was asked in that interview and the answer that Bernie gave. All right, so the question was blah, blah, blah. That's the last part of the question. You're not talking about creating a third party or creating a new political grouping, are you? And Sanders says, not right now, no. What I'm saying that is that building off of Osborne's campaign, and Osborne was a candidate in Nebraska. Dan Osborne ran as an independent and did very well. He didn't win the election, but he did much better than the Democratic candidate. The Republican won that election, but he got somewhat, 47% of the vote. It came very close to winning, at least for an independent candidate. Doesn't happen very often. We have just a handful of independents in the U.S. Congress and as well as in the state legislatures. So he goes on to say, we need strong working class candidates who are prepared to run on working class issues. Okay, that could be a Democrat, an independent, minor party candidate, presumably. But he says, where people can run in the Democratic primary and win, that's fine. All right. So if you can run as a Democrat on his agenda, or at least an agenda that's in sympathy with his, great. If you can run as a Democrat and win, great. But it's more advantageous to run as an independent outside of the Democratic primary process. We should do that as well. Now, I don't know what circumstances that would be. It is often not the case that you'll do better as an independent than as a major party candidate. And he says, at the end of the day, one of his signature phrases, in a three-way race, it takes 35% of the vote to win. Now, I like Bernie Sanders. I respect him a lot. He's very politically astute, but he is just flat out wrong that you only need 35% to win in a three-way race, because the other two candidates would have to be splitting the votes between them and have less than 35%. So something like if the Republican had 33 and the Democrat had 33 and the independent had 35, yeah, they could win. But what about in the case where the Republican has 45% of the vote and the Democrat has whatever, 25, and that leaves, I hope, 35 or something for the independent? What if one of the two major party candidates is way ahead and the other major party candidate is way behind, which is usually true because almost all the states lean towards one major party or the other, and very few states are there competitive elections. You have to have a competitive election for an independent to win with just that small fraction of the vote. They have to overtake the party that is in the lead in order to win an election. They have to get more votes than the major party candidate that is ahead. Now, that's rare. That's very rare. So right there, he's flat out wrong. There's not going to be very many races in which an independent candidate is going to be able to win an election. So what is with Bernie Sanders bringing this up? It's worked for him, but he must see that this is not a good strategy overall, which is why he's talking about where you can win as a Democrat, where you can win their primary and then win the general election. Do that. Now, they've been doing that. They've been trying to do that, the progressive movement. It's not always easy. The Democratic Party actually often works against them and tries to undercut people who are on the progressive wing and trying to win primaries. And they have a variety of ways to do that that I won't go into right now, but believe me, they do. So his hopefulness about running as a Democrat or an independent seems to me misplaced. I'm not sure why he thinks either of those strategies is a very viable one, and especially if he's talking about creating organizational structures that would last beyond individual campaigns. How do you do that with an independent candidate? Presumably, if an independent candidate who is in alignment where Bernie Sanders were to win a congressional election or a Senate election, at least, what they'd have to do is caucus with the Democratic Party, right, to have any influence, which is what Bernie Sanders does. And all the progressives in the in the U.S. Congress do. They caucus with the Democratic Party, even though the Democratic Party is, in general, not very friendly to them and willing only to make very small concessions to them, and often on the campaign trail tries to, you know, isolate them and demonize them almost as much as they do as Republicans, or at least paint them as being unserious candidates or destroying the Democratic brand. So both sides don't like the other side's influence on the Democratic Party's brand. So if you're going to caucus with the Democratic Party and Bernie Sanders thinks the Democratic Party is irredeemable, what's the point? How do you get anywhere caucusing with a party that's going to be hostile to you and is not going to change its agenda for you? Bernie, what are you thinking? I just don't see how that works. If they could actually run as Democrats and win a lot of seats and take over the Democratic Party, great. But so far, that strategy, I'm not going to say it hasn't worked in the past, so it won't work in the future. You never know what the future will bring. But what is the path towards that, Bernie? What is the path towards that? I don't see it. Why isn't Bernie? Well, he does. He has in the past made statements of support for ranked choice voting. So here, I think he's thinking, okay, if we can get rid of the spoiler issue, it'll be easier to run people as progressives and not worry about losing swing states so much or something like that. And he has made statements, but he has not been actively involved in trying to. Let me amend this to say it more clearly. Why doesn't Bernie pursue a minor party path, a third party path? Because of his early experiences that third parties can't win. Why do third parties not win? Because of our electoral system, primarily ballot access rules, and the electoral system itself, the plurality, whoever gets the most votes wins. All of that has to do with it. Why doesn't he talk about changing ballot access laws or changing our electoral system? Well, he has given verbal support to something like ranked choice voting in the past, but I just looked up before I did this video, has he co-signed the ranked choice voting bill that's in the Senate right now? That is Senate 3313. You can look this up. The Voter Choice Act currently only has two co-sponsors in the Senate. One of them, Michael Bennett, and the other one is an independent, Agnes King, but Bernie Sanders' name is not on it. So why is Bernie Sanders not pursuing the path of trying to change things to make it easier for a third party run, instead of just assuming third parties can never get anywhere and promoting a path to change that he himself admits is not going to change the party that he's affiliating with? So I don't know. That's my take on it. And you can take it for what it's worth. I don't even know what it's worth. It's free to you, right? You just have to sit through a commercial in order to view my videos. So great for that. Now, my next story, I got this excerpt from an interview with Jill Stein, Green Party presidential nominee this year and in 2016 and 2012 as well, in which she talks about changes in the Green Party and the direction that she sees it going in and that she's working to bring it in, which might include changing the party in some major way or entering a broader coalition as a bigger third party. All interesting ideas from the standpoint of the stuff I generally talk about here. This is on the Bad Faith YouTube channel that's run by Brianna Joy Gray. And there is a 30-minute video with this interview with Jill Stein from about 4 days or so earlier this week. Anyway, I encourage those of you who are interested to watch the whole interview. And she has an even longer version on her Patreon if you join her Patreon account. And I've seen several of her shows, and they're always very interesting, especially from the standpoint of left-wing politics, which is a big part of challenging the two-party system, because on the right wing, there's already been a realignment in the Republican Party where forces previously kept at arm's length were able to break through in conjunction with Donald Trump and the MAGA movement. Anyway, so the Bad Faith YouTube channel, Brianna Joy Gray interviewed Jill Stein, and out of that 30-minute part that is up for the public on YouTube, I've just chopped out about 2 minutes worth to give you a flavor of what she has to say about this. Okay, so this is up next. Jill Stein of the Green Party talking on the Bad Faith YouTube channel.
By any indicator, our democracy is in absolute all-out crisis right now, but you can't just grab it, on one issue and think that you're going to turn it around. You really have to have a broad struggle, and politics is a key part of that struggle. So I think it's just important to take the results of this election in perspective and to understand that this is part of a very big and serious struggle. This is the first election in which we have had endorsements and participation and system level collaboration with labor. And it's not old labor, it's new rank and file kind of radical labor. Also with the abandon Harris too. So it was this really exciting coalition of the Muslim American community, Greens, and really radical progressive labor. And it was really great to see sort of the makings of what could become a much larger coalition. At this point, it's not. In the same way that Workers Strike Back is just a little small movement impulse within the larger labor community. We canvassed together and sort of shared some forums, many forums actually, and are building a larger movement for political, economic, and social reform, where the movements are very consistent. And I think our visions are very consistent. We haven't quite decided yet, is it an altogether new party that is needed? Or do we have to sort of overgrow where the Green Party is now and make it something else? We haven't exactly defined how we tackle that.
Okay, so there you have it. She's talking about how in her campaign in this just just past election for president, her campaign joined forces with some elements of the labor movement, particularly those who have become disillusioned with the Democratic Party, the more progressive or radical parts of the labor movement, the more democratic parts, not democratic in the sense of Democratic Party, but those who want to see reform of the labor unions themselves, take a more aggressive stance in line with what the general rank and file want, more aggressive stance in politics. Of course, a lot of unions went, the membership actually went for Donald Trump, even if their leadership went over for Kamala Harris. So the Green Party worked with some of the more, the parts of the labor unions that want to see more change and don't think they're going to get it from the Democratic Party. They also worked with the Muslim Americans who were discouraged about the Democratic Party's support for Israel and their war within against the people who live in Gaza, and then the also some other groups that were involved in this as well. So they're working with a broader coalition of people who were talking to each other a lot and finding that they could agree a lot on a larger overall picture of what they're trying to achieve in this country as far as economic and political reform. And she strongly indicated that she thinks this may move towards something like a new third party incorporating these different parts of the coalition, or at least some expanded and reformed version of the Green Party, whether they have a new name or not. Now, there's some problems with changing the name of a party because in a lot of states you have to start all over again qualifying your party if you change the name, going out and gathering signatures or whatnot, or getting people to register to vote with that party. But maybe it's possible in some states. Anyway, she's talking strongly about that. And I think that is a viable option. That is something that third parties, minor parties, alternative parties, whatever you want to call them. I like to call them alternative parties, but I keep lapsing into the more general vernacular. um, they should be building their party by finding more parts of the electorate that are in alignment with their goals and trying to, build beyond their base, or just trying to find candidates that speak exactly for what their current base wants and move it beyond that to find ways to bring people into it. So they're going in the right direction as far as I'm concerned. Now, with their agenda, I will say that I am largely in alignment with the agenda of the Green Party, but it's not always real coherent. And Jill Stein also did address complaints that others have made that the Green Party is in some sense dysfunctional. And this is something I agreed with her about. She said that there is a problem with, I wouldn't use this language. She said there's a problem with hierarchy in the party, not that there is a hierarchy. Brianna Joy Gray asked her about a top down leadership structure. And her experience and mine is that that's not at all the case. Grassroots democracy is one of the foundational values of the Green Party. But the problem from my standpoint is that grassroots democracy principle has never really been defined as how it would work in practice. And people use it just to attack any kind of leadership that emerges within the party. And from a sociological standpoint, every group is going to have leaders. Some people who have the time or the abilities, like, to speak well rhetorically, to inspire confidence in the people of the grouping, emerge in a leadership role, and to give people cues as to what the direction to go forward is, people who do more strategic thinking and all that kind of stuff. So you're going to have leaders. And even if your general standpoint is that our society should have more grassroots democracy, a political party is something different. It has a specific goal, and you got to organize it in such a way that it's efficient in moving toward that goal. So I wouldn't say hierarchy, but I would say any kind of sense that if leaders emerge, they should be torn down. The really problem is to have a leadership that can move the party in a unified direction, help shape the discourse, and have it accountable to the membership, have it be able to circulate leadership as the membership changes its views or becomes dissatisfied with somebody as a leader. So the Green Party needs a lot of reforms, but it sounds like it's moving in a direction in which it's trying to change things, which I think is all to the good. But in conjunction with that, the Green Party has also just like Bernie Sanders, been in support of ranked choice voting. They've done a lot of work, actually, the membership of the party, some members anyway, to try to advance ranked choice voting in different places, and a big part of the reason why it continued to advance over the last 30 years. But as we saw in this last election, there's a lot of rejection of new initiatives to institute both open primaries and ranked choice voting, or one or the other, or both combined. And a lot of those measures failed. So it seems like that movement may have stalled. The proponents of the movement say it's just a blip and they'll be back. But I think the Green Party also needs to reassess whether this is the best type of voting electoral reform to back that if ranked choice voting truly does work as well as they say. And I say that because if you saw my interview with Sarah Wolk, and this is something I've worked on a lot, thought about a lot, ranked choice voting was a good thing to promote. Well, it was the leading thing, and we didn't have a lot of better examples. But it has become clear over time that ranked choice voting, as it becomes instituted and implemented, has problems that the voters don't like when they see, because they were overpromised as to what the results would be. And there are now other systems that people are becoming more and more aware of that are superior to ranked choice voting. So why continue to back a system that has known problems and the public is turning against, when there are other alternatives that you could be looking at, which is a whole nother topic. So Green Party, kudos to them. I hope to continue on this path of building a broader coalition and a broader movement, thinking about internal reform and how the party could be better structured, and also moving on from supporting ranked choice voting to looking at some of the alternative voting methods that could be even better than that, and getting behind that as well. And if they did all those things, boy, I would really be tempted to join in as well, even though I have some areas of disagreement with the general overall um, political, philosophical standpoint of the Green Party. I'm picky, but I'm willing to compromise. I'm willing to, go with the best option available. And even if it doesn't completely 100% represent what I believe. Um, so that's my discussion of those three big stories of the week. I do have a couple of other things I want to briefly tell you about that happened in the last week or so. One is that the Washington Post published an article about the group No Labels. You may remember way back earlier this year, there was a phone call between Democratic operatives that was leaked somehow to the press, and they were definitely conspiring to try to keep no labels from getting on the ballot or recruiting a presidential candidate. They are also planning to attack Robert F. Kennedy Jr.'s signature gathering efforts, as well as discredit people like Jill Stein and Cornel West. So they were conspiring to keep all these minor party and independent candidates from getting anywhere in the presidential election. Why this is in the news again is because there was a lawsuit brought by No Labels against the people who put up a fake website that mimicked their real website. You see on your screen, if you're watching the video, at the top is the real No Labels website, and at the bottom is the fake No Labels website. And you can see some similarities, that they both have kind of a gray and yellow color scheme. There is a click on button at the upper right. The No Labels logo is white letters against a black background. So a lot of similarities that would cause you to think that this fake website was actually the website of No Labels. But what the fake one does is promotes Donald Trump. So it's trying to keep people who are either Republicans who are against Trump or Democrats leaning toward a more centrist type third party effort to vote for No Labels. They're trying to convince them that this is only going to help Donald Trump. And in fact, No Labels is trying to help Donald Trump, trying to convince them of that. That's not true. They're very much not in favor of Trump, in order to deter people from supporting No Labels. And what came out of this, they had a lawsuit about this fake website. And then the judge not only gave an order to take down the fake website, but he gave the authority for the lawyers for No Labels to pursue documents that have anything to do with who was actually behind this effort and who was conspiring, or they didn't use the word conspiring, but which kind of organizations and individuals were behind this and whatever else they were planning to do. What was the larger strategy behind this? So No Labels lawyers have been pursuing this and subpoenaing some of these organizations, and more documentations has been coming out, emails and documents and the rest, showing the kinds of plans that they had made to try to sabotage all these alternative candidate efforts. And so just more gory details coming out showing how far the Democratic Party has departed from its rhetoric overvaluing democracy. So that's one news story. Not really new, but they're just getting more documentation about what exactly was involved in this effort. And then finally, the Libertarian Party was hoping that Donald Trump would honor his promise to them to put a libertarian in a cabinet level position. And this week, the leaders of the Libertarian Party's National Committee, which is under the influence of a faction of the party called the Mises Caucus, who were very friendly with both Donald Trump and Robert F. Kennedy Jr., heralded Robert F. Kennedy Jr. as their libertarian nominee. That Trump has honored his promise by nominating Robert F. Kennedy Jr. as the head of the Health and Human Services Department. So they're saying this is his promise. Now, Kennedy, of course, is not closely affiliated with the Libertarian Party. He holds some views that could be characterized libertarian. He holds a lot of other views that could not be characterized as libertarian, at least not by me or a lot of libertarians. And it really seems like they're just reaching for straws in order to say they got something out of their efforts that tilted towards Kennedy and Trump in the campaign rather than towards their own candidate, the one that was nominated at the convention, Chase Oliver. And they're trying to justify their actions by saying that it actually paid off. I think it's kind of straining credibility to say that putting Kennedy up for nomination was in any way a favor to the Libertarian Party. Kennedy has a lifetime membership in the Libertarian Party, but as far as I know, he's never registered as a Libertarian Party voter or been involved in the party in any other way. So I don't know, 50-50. Is he or is he not a libertarian? Your opinion is as good as mine and sometimes better. So I do appreciate your comments, and please do continue to follow this show. Share with people, because after the presidential campaign was over, an awful lot of people were coming to my channel because they were interested in the presidential campaign, particularly the candidacy of Robert F. Kennedy Jr. When I picked up on that as the major challenge to the two-party system, got a lot of viewers, a lot of subscribers in the thousands, way beyond what I had before. Now it's died down. I'm in the hundreds, which for me, I'm glad to speak to that many people. I'm glad people are interested in what I have to say, at least to that extent. But I would like the channel to build more. If you know of anyone interested in challenges to the two parties or ideas for new parties, and I'll have more to say about that as I have recently. I'm going to talk about that a lot, especially in the coming year. Please encourage other people to subscribe, to check out the channel, and for you to like, share, all the rest. I appreciate all that. If you want to donate, you know where you can go. You can go to patreon.com/political dharma, or you can go right to my website, politicaldharma.org, and give a one-time donation. That helps. And I'll be using that probably to aid in some kind of party building effort as we go forward. So that's it for this week. I always appreciate you checking in. All right, enjoy the rest of your weekend, and I'll be back maybe sometime next week. Bye now.